Hey everyone, welcome to my second channel, yay! This is chapter 26 of a series that I've begun on my first channel, Kiwi Queen 13, where I've rewritten Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach since the entire fandom has agreed that Security Breach is terrible and needs a better writer and a cohesive plot. I'm very proud of what I've done so far and can guarantee that you'll be satisfied with the rewrite that I have here, so yeah, but because of reasons that I can explain at the end of the video, I've had to move the second half of this rewrite over here to continue it. So yeah, if you've come across this video and channel by accident, I highly recommend that you go to the links in the description and watch the first half of the story, because we get dunked in the middle of a bunch of spoilers over here. We are in the final battle. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. I should really wrap this up soon so I don't lose your attention. So here we go, on to the episode. Woo! Ah!
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Fazbear Entertainment would like you to put your hands together for the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear.
Rewritten! Moon had been watching in disbelief as the fight played out on the other side of the room, trying to decide whether it would be better to go help or just stay here and make sure she can't get away. It was so surreal to be watching the other animatronics getting attacked by empty air, knowing that Vanny was filling that spot, that Vanny was actually trying to hurt them. His thoughts just kept on running in circles the entire time, not getting anywhere. It was just a constant stream of, Vanny can't be the one doing this. She would never do this. This can't be happening. This has to be some sort of nightmare. He would wake up any minute now. He had to wake up. It can't be her. Before he had time to come to terms with reality, Freddy went down. Then Bonnie. And so Moon was left there alone in the cold cave, the final obstacle for Vanny to overcome. At first, Moon had stayed firmly on the stage because he thought that she was about to try and sneak around him. He couldn't see her at all, but he assumed that she was about to barrel into him and force her way past, so he had been holding the line and bracing for whatever she was about to do to him. When he realized Vanny was actually going for Gregory instead, it was too late. The scuffle between Gregory and Vanny ended with something flying across the room and rolling to a stop at the base of the stage. Moon gasped and blinked down at it in shock as he realized he could see it now. Moon could see the head of Vanny's suit. It was a rabbit. That detail caught him off guard, disgust prickling up the back of his neck when he remembered what Afton had used to lure kids to their deaths. The bent ears bobbed back and forth in their sockets, the vivid blood-red eyes staring straight through him. The permanent grin dripped with the fire extinguisher's fluids, like some sick parody of rabies foam. Now that the costume's head was off, the suit was registered as incomplete. When he looked back up, he realized that it wasn't just the head that he could see. It was all of her. Vanny's white rabbit suit was armored heavily, the powerful weight of her attacks making sense now. The angles of her elbows, knees, and shoulders all bore sharpened edges, every inch of her body layered in a protective steel casing that none of the animatronics had access to. Yes, Moon and the others' endoskeletons were made of metal, but most of their bodies were rubbery and soft on the outside with layers of silicone, so they wouldn't accidentally hurt the kids while playing with them. But for Vanny, hurting kids was clearly not a concern. In only a few seconds, she was revealed to be much more of a threat than the usual foolish thieves that the animatronics had to deal with. Now, Vanny's real head stuck up from her shoulders, much smaller than the proportions of the rest of her mech-like suit. Her blonde ponytail was all over the place as she tried to rub chunks of foam out of her eyes, coughing and spitting up pieces of it. Thinking fast, Moon grabbed onto the head of the costume and tossed it behind him. It fell directly into the scrap dump, becoming lost beneath the heaping mounds of rust as the dying machinery began to fight over the spare part, tearing it to pieces. He could already tell why Gregory had done something like this. The animatronics could actually stand a chance against her now. "Get over here, you little..." Vanny hissed as she dragged Gregory out of Freddy's writing compartment, finally claiming him before Moon even had time to blink. Now that she had her hands on a child, he couldn't take it anymore. Moon retracted his catchers slightly, giving up on the web blocking the way out, jumping down from the stage and starting forward. Before he could get very far, Vanny pulled Gregory to the ground, turning to face Moon, her eyes streaming in red of irritation as she tried to clear away the excess amount of foam. Both of her metal gauntlets were squeezing Gregory's throat so tight the little boy couldn't even cry for help. "Stop!" Vanny demanded. Moon slammed on the brakes, his various programs all fighting each other, creating a mess of limbs that kept jerking forward and then yanking back, conflicting protocols running rampant through his head. He had to get him away from her, but she'll hurt him if he gets close. He had to save him. No, he had to stay still. He can't save him if he's dead. "I'll kill him, I swear I'll kill him," Vanessa snarled, giving him no room for doubt. "Back off, now!" Moon retreated to the stage, not daring to test her patience. Instead, he cast the catchers back over the exit to block her way out, turning to face her like he had originally. Fanny took a moment to catch her breath, flicking her head to brush away stray strips of blonde hair out of her eyes, blinking fast to wash away the last of the foam. Her gaze was locked with his like a magnet, no matter which way her face tilted, slowly sizing him up like she was trying to figure out if she could actually win in a fight against him. Moon was trying his best to appear strong and fearless, but in truth, he was terrified. Before, in the theater, he had already thought of himself as seriously injured, but compared to how he felt now, all of that had been like a stubbed toe. When Bonnie had hit him head-on with his bowling ball arm, the constant throbbing soreness in his body was crushed and replaced by splitting agony. Despite his best efforts, Moon was shaking where he stood, every intake costing him greatly. His chest was absolutely screaming with pain, the fractures vividly clear to him, making it even harder to cool off his systems in the middle of all this. Every tiny tilt and shift was met with horribly sharp aches, demanding for him to stop. And he was just standing still right now. If Fanny fought back, and he had no doubt that she would, he was worried that... Moon did his best to keep his expression neutral. He couldn't show weakness. Movement from behind her made Vanny's head snap around, catching sight of Freddy and the others beginning to come back online. Roxy's acid green claws slid in and out, her glow flickering. Chica's beak gaped open and closed as she slowly lifted her front half off of the ground. Monty curled over his broken face, squinting his pink eyes open to survey his surroundings. Now that they were stirring, Vanny dodged back from them too. She nearly tripped over Bonnie, then retreated further towards the left wall so her back wasn't shown to any of her enemies. Bonnie was a miserable, shivering pile on the floor, continuing to strip delicate fibers off of his floppy ears, not anywhere close to joining the fight again after what she had said to him. Freddy's eye flew open the moment that he felt his riding compartment was empty, immediately pushing himself up off the floor, holding onto a bench for balance, staring around in disoriented panic until his eyes landed on who Vanny had in her hands. "Gregory!" Freddy called. "Wait!" When Gregory heard Freddy, he surged up in protest, trying to squirm out of Vanny's grasp. Gregory bit one of her metal fingers, but only whimpered in regret. He was more likely to crack a tooth than do any real damage to her. She held on tight, dragging him back, seeming unconcerned of his frantically kicking legs. She was still choking him. The message was clear. "She has Gregory! Everyone stop!" Moon warned. "Don't hurt him!" Freddy yelled. "Vanessa, please, don't hurt Gregory!" No, Vanny said, almost amused. "Why do you think I grabbed him?" "Please, we can talk about this," Freddy stammered. "I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. What do you want?" "I want a way out of here," Vanny said. "I can pop Gregory's head off before you get one step closer. If you all don't want that, you're going to let me go." Outrage, absolute outrage overcame him. The heat seared up his body like a wildfire, a red haze pressing him to act. But he held himself down, every piston trembling, locked with Gregory's terrified gaze. Moon was the only thing standing between Vanny and her freedom, wobbling right at the edge of the wooden stage. "Move out of the way," Vanny said. She had no problem with looking him right in the eye, no matter how much it was hurting him. It had been one thing to watch the others fight back against an invisible threat, but it was another to be staring directly into the same face that he had reared and cared for and comforted for all of his life. "Give me Gregory first," Moon challenged. "No," Vanny said, "not yet. Let me pass." A minute of absolute silence descended on them, hanging in the balance, as if every particle of dust was frozen in the air to watch the standoff. The only sounds that proved time hadn't stopped completely were the shattered sobs of Bonnie's collapse far away. "How many kids have you killed?" The words felt like razor blades in his mouth. He silently prayed for it not to be true, that he hadn't failed even more than he originally thought. "Only one, James," Fanny said. "I'm not that messy." Despite everything, Moon was slightly relieved. "What are you going to be doing once you escape?" Moon asked slowly, unable to stop the tremble in his voice. "How many more kids are you going to kill?" She didn't answer immediately, but once she did, she made a squeamish frown. "Look, Moon, unlike Afton, I don't get any pleasure from doing this. I'm only going to take the amount that I need to get it right. Then I'll be done." "That didn't answer my question," Moon said firmly. "How many more will you kill?" Vanny thought about that, then shrugged. Enough. Horror marched up his back like freezing water flooding in a dark cave closing above his head. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be her. "Vanny, please don't make me do this," Moon begged, his catchers extending and looping over themselves, the hooks scraping against each other with agitated metallic squeals. "You know what I'm programmed to do." "Yeah, I know," Fanny said, straightening up with a smug grin. "But I also know that you won't do it." He didn't know what to say. He tried to keep his expression from changing, but that only seemed to confirm to her what they both already knew. "You're not going to take me alive, you know. I'm not going to just give up and let you hand me over to the police," she said. "So, do you really think you'll be able to do it? To kill me in cold blood?" She gestured widely as if imploring him to shoot her in the heart. "Because that's your only option." "You tortured a kid to death," Moon said, still straining to keep his glare unwavering. "I've torn a person's throat out for less." "And then cried to me about it later," Fanny added on. "And you barely knew the guy. It had been, a couple of weeks since he befriended you? Even after you caught him in the act and saw him for what he really was, you still had nightmares about how you reacted for months afterwards." That struck a chord deep inside of him, and he struggled to keep a straight face. The old guilt and shame and horror of what he had done pressed up at the back of his head like a crowd pushing against a chain-link fence, demanding to be let back in. She just kept on going, rubbing salt into the wound. "There was so much blood," he said. "It seemed to take forever for him to bleed out, and even longer for paramedics to arrive." She tilted her chin up. "You really think you have the guts to do that to me?" Moon willed himself to respond, to retain the cold stare, but nothing came out. His legs grew weak, the pain in his chest worsening in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. He knew, in retrospect, that the man had not been as kind as he presented himself, that he'd only been trying to get access to one of his kids, that his true intentions were disgusting, to trade a kid's happy childhood for his own personal gratification. That man had deserved it, he knew. Even Jeremy had agreed on that and refrained from punishing him for it. But that didn't make the hurt go away. He trusted him. He trusted him with his kids for 5 minutes, and His eyes involuntarily flickered on and off rapidly, and Vanny only smiled wider, recognizing the signal that he was far more upset than his mechanical body could physically express. "You are sick," Moon whispered through clenched teeth. "I really think you should let me go," she went on, unbothered. "Even if you did manage to work up the courage to murder me, I'd still drag Gregory to hell with me. It'll only take a second to snap his little neck." Gregory closed his eyes, tears leaking down his reddened cheeks. He was still fighting back, kicking against her armored legs, but the struggles were pointless. Moon started forward, blades cutting at the air, but Gregory's eyes flew wide open as his throat was strangled shut. Vanny's gaze was steady. A warning. Okay, Moon yelped, reaching his limit. He reeled in his catchers, stepping aside. "Okay, fine, you can go. Just give him back once you get past." Vanny loosened her hold on Gregory, letting him take a little gulp of air. She strutted up to the stage and passed him by, still not breaking eye contact without a shred of shame. As she made her way around the scrap dump's ledge, he waited for her to stop and let go at some point. Even when she took her first step on the rickety metal stairs that led up to the storage room, she still didn't release Gregory. Vanny rounded the first zigzag of steps, then stopped just as Moon was about to remind her of what she had agreed to. She adjusted Gregory in her grasp, flipping open a small box-shaped mechanism set into the wall. He hadn't really paid attention to it until now, thinking that it had been some sort of fire alarm. But now he noticed that a wad of wires stemmed from it, leading to the gears beneath the stairs. Wait, gears? Vanny pulled a small lever hidden inside the box. What happened next confused him at first. The stairs that led down here were strung back and forth between platforms, allowing the pathway to climb up the sheer rock in an orderly pattern. At least a dozen or more stories up loomed the door that led back to the storage room, the railings being the only thing keeping a person from falling to their death once they had reached the top. And when Vanny pulled the first lever, the entire cavern shook as the stairs began to move. The steps that were touching the floor clanged and then lifted, folding up into the bottom side of the platform that she was standing on, leaving an empty space between her and the ground. She was retracting the stairs, he realized. They were built to be retracted, to trap the things held down here. "What are you doing?" Freddie cried out, starting forward. The others were all up now, Roxy's pink glow producing enough light for them to see what was going on. "Making sure you don't do something stupid until I have the redactions ready," Vanny called down, her shoulders relaxing now that she had set off her escape. "Don't worry about Gregory. You won't remember him at all after this. Same thing with Bonnie. He'll have to stay down here with me, but the rest of you can go back to your normal lives like nothing happened." She began to make her way up the next set of stairs, while Gregory made another vain attempt to wriggle free. "What? No, wait, that wasn't the deal!" Roxy snarled, her eye round. "You said..." "Oh no, Vanessa lied?" Vanny gasped in a sing-song voice. "Guess she has to stop. It's the rules." She cranked the next lever. Vibrations shivered up through Moon's feet as the second flight of steps retracted and folded itself into the platform like the first. Moon's thoughts absolutely erupted, every animatronic around him bombarded with panic as they realized what she was doing. "Wait, stop! You can't just do this! Vanessa, please don't!" They all gathered closer to the empty space where the bottom steps used to reach, staring up at Vanny as she slowly made her way up to the next platform. She was too far to reach by now, taking her time with a satisfied grin written all over her face. "Vanny, you can't do this to Gregory!" Moon hollered up at her, every wire in his body practically splitting open with desperation as he tried to make her understand. "He's just a kid. Think about his mother. She's going to miss him. You can't take him away from her." Judging by what the other one said, his mom doesn't give a crap, Fanny said bluntly. She didn't even file a missing persons report when they finally escaped from that pig pen she called a house. She perked up with an excited sparkle in her eyes. In fact, Gregory is the perfect test subject. Nobody will notice that he's gone. Nobody cares about him at all. This is probably the only useful thing he could ever do with his life. He should be happy about this. Gregory kicked fiercely at her again, frantic tears rolling down his face. She was holding him too tight for him to properly speak, only barely allowing him to still breathe. I care about him, Freddie argued, his voice hitching as he tried and failed to climb the rocky wall. We all do. It doesn't matter what his mother thinks. That doesn't mean we can't care about him. I can fix that in just a second, Fanny said. You won't care about him by the time you wake up tomorrow morning. Gregory responded by biting her wrist. It was a part that was covered in black rubber, which should be the weakest point in her body. She only smacked him on the side of the head for that, not taking any real damage. Gregory settled on stomping on her armored feet, probably hurting himself more than he was hurting her. But he's a child, Moon argued, feeling like he was scattering all over the place in the rush to keep her from turning away. He's only 10. He hasn't gotten to grow up like you yet. You can't just take his life like this. It's not worth it. Yeah, if you think someone should die for your stupid science fair project, why don't you use yourself? Roxy added, her claws digging into the stone wall. Why don't you use someone that you know, huh? How would you feel if someone took away your family for something as dumb as this? The collective calm Vanny had carried before gave way all at once, making her stop in the middle of reaching for the third lever. Then her face contorted into an unrecognizable snarl. I do know how that feels! That's the problem! I know how that feels, and it's all your fault! All of them jumped back at the sudden change. It was like a floodgate had been thrown open out of nowhere, and she kept going and going, her eyes wild. You made him think it would work! He believed in you all! He was so sure that it would work! He gave everything and himself to this project! Gregory kicked a few more times at her feet, strangled into a tiny whimper. She was choking him even tighter than before, strands of her blonde hair flying free from the ponytail and whipping around her face. She began to rant at full speed. It was always you, never me, never his own kid. And honestly, I get it now. I get why he poured so much of himself into you guys. It would all be for nothing if we failed. He was either going to go through with the project or die trying, and he did. That's the worst part. He did. I never got my dad back. No, of course not. You've been taking him away from me my entire life, and now you finished him off. Moon was only growing more disoriented with every word that she spoke, barely any of it making sense to him. She just kept on rolling on and on like she was caught up in a stampede. Why did it have to work for you, but not for him? None of you deserves it as much as he did. All you've done is hate each other and lie to each other and hurt each other and feel so sorry for yourselves that you forget to be grateful for what you already have. And I have to watch it every single night. I've watched you all for years, and nobody cares. I sit at a desk and stare at a bunch of stupid screens all night and watch you guys fight and scream and cry. You all should have been the ones that died. You're all lucky that you're the only things giving me a paycheck, because otherwise I would have killed you all a long time ago. Fanny's words echoed around the cavern long after she had stopped, the woman above them heaving with an emotion that he had never seen from her before. Moon had no idea how to even start processing what all that meant. She flicked her head, trying to clear a few frayed strands of her hair out of her face again. I've already lost everything for this project, Fanny spat down at them, leaning back from the railing and continuing her way up the stairs. Don't you dare act like I'm not allowed to do that to someone else. She was about to pull the next lever to drag Gregory the rest of the way up to seal their fate. The desperation that had been building in him finally snapped. Like the others, Moon began to try and scale the rocky wall. His catchers extended over it, the tiny hooks jutting against the stone and only managing to pick tiny chips out. His catchers weren't long enough to reach, and the man-made wall was too sheer and smooth for him to climb. He looked to the others, who were noticing the same thing, exchanging hopeless glances. Freddy leaped into action, getting beneath the place where the stairs used to be. "Moon, stack on top of me! You gotta get up there, quick!" Moon immediately did as he said, climbing onto Freddy's shoulders, keeping his balance as he slowly stood up, stretching his long arms above his head, extending his catchers as far as they possibly could. The thin black wires slowed down the further that they went, crawling over the gray stone only a meter away from the bottom of the stairs, then a few centimeters, then a millimeter. Vanny hurriedly pulled the next lever, seeming to realize that she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. Just as the stairs began to retract even higher away from him, one of his hooks managed to snag itself around the safety railing. His feet left Freddy's shoulders as the structure began to rise, and he swallowed down a yell of pain as his bad arm was strained again. He threw as many of his wires that he could get around the railing, reeling himself in, finally catching an elbow around the support beam and beginning to heave himself up the rest of the way. "Oh, shit!" Vanny shouted, the thumping sounds of her metal feet fleeing above him. Luckily, Moon was used to maneuvers like this and was able to find his footing and make it up and over the safety railing to collapse down on the stairs, grimacing the whole way. Her shadow passed over him and he lifted his head. She was rushing up the stairs as fast as she could. "Don't let her escape!" Roxy shouted up at him. "Yeah, I know that!" Moon hollered back, already on his feet and following her up the shaking stairs. His pursuit was jarred to a halt by a sharp stabbing sensation that needled its way up his spine. "Too fast," his body was telling him. "You're moving too fast. Slow down. Be gentle." No time for gentle. Keep going. Push past it. You're fine." Unfortunately, Sun chose this exact moment to try and wake up again. Where are we?" Sun asked Moon in their head, dark greenish-orange confusion rippling off of his thoughts. What's going on? Why are you hurting so bad?" "Go back to sleep, Sonny," Moon whispered to him, still bounding up the stairs. "You don't want to see this." Sun tried to stay at the surface, but his exhaustion dragged him back down and he passed out again, away from the troubles of the outside world. Vanny had already stopped wasting time retracting the stairs, but Gregory was now making his kidnapping as difficult as it could possibly be for her. He was refusing to walk and forcing her to drag his entire weight along with her, continuously grabbing onto the edges of each step, trying to trip her up. The closer that Moon got, the more focused he became, slipping into the determined concentration that he had grown familiar with. Fighting Vanny seemed impossible, but this his security protocol could do. When he finally caught up, he performed everything as a basic reflex. The kidnapper wasn't looking at him, instead trying to readjust her grip on Gregory. Moon landed on the two of them, a set of wires assigned to each of their arms. He twisted and squeezed on her wrist while peeling Gregory's hand out of hers in the weakest direction against the thumb. In half a second, Gregory was free, and he released the kidnapper while kicking her away from them. Moon sprang back with Gregory safely in his arms and immediately hid Gregory behind his body, ready for a retaliation from the kidnapper. Instead, Vanny turned tail and bolted, fully committed to escape now that her prize was gone. When he was sure that she wasn't going to come back, Moon turned to Gregory, asking him, "Are you hurt?" Gregory looked freaked out, but he shook his head, mumbling something about how he thinks he just lost a tooth. Moon began to push him to go back down the stairs, telling him, "Figure out the lever, try to get the others up here. I'll go after her." Gregory sped off out of sight, while Moon continued the chase. Moon clambered up the stairs 3 at a time, not pausing to rest of each zigzagging turn of the platforms, slowly gaining on the clangs of her footsteps. His body was fighting against him with every inch, the pain of his injury slowing him down, backed up by the anguish that had taken over his mind. He suddenly grew scared that he wouldn't survive another hit like Bonnie's. The technicians never told them a lot about how they were made or what they were made of. They only said that the chest cavity was the most vital part of them, and to immediately alert them if they suspect something is broken. So where was his limit? Had he reached it already? But all of that was just his physical weakness. His emotional weakness was far worse. Moon didn't really know what he would do once he finally caught up to her. He would have to fight her. Already unbearable dread was flooding his system, trying to hold him back, flashes of his little girl's face taunting him. He couldn't do this. Even though his security protocol knew exactly what to do, every molecule in his body was still trying to pull away from it, to completely refuse to do anything that unspeakably horrible. He couldn't attack his own kid. Moon could see her metal-clad back now, skidding around each corner with a desperate swiftness, the distance between them closing. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do this. He couldn't hurt Vanny, much less fight her. But Vanny had reached the top of the stairs now. He remembered that DJ still had his collar on. Moon had no doubt that Vanny was still equipped with her remote. Vanny was going to escape. And if she escaped... Moon tried instead to focus on that, to focus on the mortifying state they had found James in. Think of James. Think of how he must have died, mutilated and alone, begging for the pain to stop. Vanny would do that again to even more of his kids, however many times she wanted to. Rage sparked to life in him. He fed it, trying to get it to grow into a bonfire as he made it up the last few steps. He had to do it for the kids. They needed him. The final flight of stairs disappeared beneath his feet as he landed on the highest platform. Vanny's hands were on the door handle that led to the storage room, but her head turned just in time to see him right there, only inches away. She looked terrified. A vision of little Vanny overcame him, the child that he had known since he was made, the child that he had watched over and played with and put to bed, smiling and giggling, not knowing what she was going to become. He leaped. Vanny didn't dodge in time. They collided with a world-shattering crash, hitting the rickety metal floor, the door slamming shut as she was ripped away from it. But instead of carrying out the practiced routine of bringing a kidnapper down, his hands scuffed harmlessly over her metallic armor. Hands. The catchers had retracted. But of course they did. It was impossible for him to hurt a kid. No, wait, no, that wasn't right. He had to focus, he had to fight. She wasn't actually a heavy blow to his face knocked that thought into a disoriented spiral. His fingers pointlessly scrabbled at the breaks in her plating as she bucked and tried to throw him off. No, his catchers, he had to bring the catchers back. Vanny punched him in the gut so hard the world disappeared into blinding red pain, his body locking up uselessly as he was shoved away from her. She was now fallen on her back, her head lying beside him and her feet pointed away from him, upside down from his perspective. Prone. Despite his lack of weaponry, Moon managed to summon up his strength again, plunging back down onto her before she could get up. He went for her throat, latching his hands around her neck, drawing a gurgled cry from her. Her hands grabbed onto his, struggling to tear him off, but she wasn't facing him at all and couldn't bring her legs up to kick above her head where he was planted, unable to get any leverage in this position. Choke her out, his security protocol demanded. The hooked tips of his wires slithered out of the base of his hand, finally reappearing, encouraging him to hold on. Not a kid. She wasn't a kid. He could do this. He had to. Her mouth gaped open and closed soundlessly, beginning to spasm as she tried to curl up and reach him. Her red claws got tangled in his newly appearing catchers, her face blue, eyes fading. She was choking, suffocating. Emotion hit him like a freight train. All that he saw was a little girl crying in his arms, face full of snot and tears, burying herself into his side, seeking comfort. He loosened his grip, horrified. What was he doing? The confusion was brief, but it was enough. Vanny was finally able to wrench herself around so her body was facing him properly, ramming a jagged metal heel directly into his injured side, where it hurt the most. Agony exploded inside of him like a grenade, forcing him to vividly feel every individual splinter and crack in his protective casing. Before he knew it, his catchers retreated back inside of his hand, once again confused by his conflicting protocols. Moon was still holding on to Vanny, even though he was continuously unsuccessful in his attempts to bring the catchers back. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do this to Vanny. He had no idea what he even wanted right now, stuck between decisions too difficult to make in such a short amount of time. She jerked right, then left, trying to dislodge him. Neither of them could get up, with the other still on the ground. His fists were balled up in her hair, using every ounce of strength that he had left to keep pulling her down with his weight. Vanny managed to right herself and brace a metal foot against his chest, gaining leverage as she wrenched upwards away from him. Several strands of blonde hair were ripped out in the process, but Moon instinctively let go of her when the pulling nearly yanked his weak arm off. His shoulders twisted at the movement, the pain intensifying, leaving him a crumpled mess on the floor with a wide-awake brother having a panic attack in his head. "Moon, what's going on? Is that Vanny? Stop! Why are you hurting her?" Every program in Moon's head was screaming at him to get up, get up. She was coming back for more. He was still in between her and the door. He couldn't let her pass. He had to do it for the kids. He had to. She would kill them. She would kill all of them. He couldn't let her do this. Do it for the kids. Given a new burst of energy, Moon reared up from the floor, throwing himself at her again just as she tried to dodge around him. He was trying so hard to use his catchers again, but it just wasn't working anymore. He couldn't hurt a kid. It didn't matter if she wasn't really a kid anymore. She was his kid, and he couldn't do this to her. He just couldn't. Moon's fingers barely made any difference when he tried to hold her down, letting her slip out and punch him in the jaw hard enough that he felt something fly loose. Agony shot through his chest again as he wrestled against her desperately, doing everything that he could to keep her away from the exit, even though every inch of his body was screaming at him to stop. When was the last time he had seen her smile? What was the last thing that he said to her before the daycare closed? He couldn't remember. And now it was over already. He would never get that back. That devastating realization made the world teeter unsteadily around him. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do this. He had to stop. The moment that he drew back, Fanny lifted him and swung around to slam him into the safety railing. His spine nearly folded in half as he was thrown against it, making him howl in pain. And then the railing he was pinned against snapped and buckled, breaking, disconnecting. His head turned just in time to see the broken safety railing tumble down, down, down into the perilous drop beneath them, the darkness of the scrap dump swallowing it up within a second. Moon was on his back, everything above his shoulders hanging off the edge, and the only thing holding him above certain death was Vanny's armored hands. Fear lurched through him as he registered the position that he was in, his center of gravity trying to pull him down, the platform tilting and creaking and threatening to give way at any moment. "Stay down!" Vanny shouted, inches away from his face. "Stay down, damn it!" She was leaning her entire weight on top of his broken chest to hold him there, which caused the worst pain he had ever felt in his life. Moon could literally feel himself cracking apart with the pressure, the fissures in his plating digging deeper and deeper inside of him, every struggling jerk of his body sending another live wire of agony up his spine. It felt like a chainsaw had been impaled through him, its rows of jagged iron teeth spinning and spinning and spinning and... "Moon, what's happening? Are you okay?" He wasn't able to answer, son. The pain was so bad that he couldn't even form a coherent thought anymore. He couldn't breathe. He was a robot, so he thought that he didn't need to breathe, but the desperate burning in his chest told him otherwise. Overheating, that was probably it. He feebly clawed at her arms, willing himself to summon the catchers again, knowing that it was probably his only hope now. But it just didn't happen. He missed her. He missed her so much. When had he last spoken to her before all this? Could he have stopped this from happening? Did he mess up somehow during all that time babysitting her when her father couldn't make ends meet? What did he do wrong? Moon grew weaker and weaker the longer that she held him. Red and black spots began to pop all over his vision, the world fading, everything being crushed from the inside out as she suffocated him with her rabbit suit's oppressive weight. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move, he couldn't even cry out anymore. She was right. He couldn't do this to her. Moon finally dropped his hands and went limp, giving up. Right when he was sure that she would toss him over the edge for good measure, she let him go. She actually let him go. When Vanny got off of him, he took in a huge gulp of air, followed by several more, shuddering with each one. Fire coursed through his chest with every movement that he made, the life-saving breaths making the fractures sear deeper into him as he tried to cool off. "Stay down," Vanny repeated firmly. He was vaguely aware of the fact that she was watching him carefully, waiting to see what he would do. Moon stayed down, fighting to breathe through the cracks in his chest. He didn't know what else to do. When Vanny seemed sure that he wouldn't follow, she backed up, slowly turning towards the door, finding the handle. She was escaping. A bolt of panic shot through the haze of crippling pain that had consumed him. His mind was ravaged by a merciless battlefield. Not only was Sun frantically trying to take over in the dim lighting, but every program in Moon's head was beating each other to the ground. He could only barely hold the stalemate between it all. Moon's security protocol ordered for him to do his job and attack, while everything else inside of him wanted nothing more than to just let her go. Just let her go, let her wipe his memories, let him forget that she ever did something as horrible as this. She was right. She was his kid. He couldn't kill her. He couldn't even fight her, not even for his other kids. The ones that were in danger. The ones that she was going to tear limb from limb, just like James. The real stakes of this fight returned to the forefront of his mind, reminding him of what he was even doing up here in the first place. Vanny wasn't done, so he wasn't either. In those messy, chopped-up moments, he was finally able to make the decision. Vanessa was not his kid anymore. Finally, late but not unwanted, his catchers reactivated. Moon's hands split in half to let the tangle of wires and hooks burst forth, the individual snake-like whips slithering around him like a newly spun spiderweb. Vanessa had cracked the door open by now, about to escape into the infinite darkness beyond. Moon shakily sat up from the floor, forcing himself to bear through the pain inside of him, and swung the catchers right at the back of her exposed head. Vanessa screamed. The wires snapped taut and yanked back. It was the hardest thing he ever had to do, but Moon roughly pulled her to the ground, the catchers already enveloping her vulnerable head to limit her movements, just like he had done many times for dozens of other filthy criminals. He had to, he couldn't falter, not now. Sun was pleading for him to stop, but Moon kept going, yelling at her, "Please, don't move! Just stop struggling, they'll cut you if you keep moving!" Usually this was extremely effective. Every single petty thief that he had come across understood how disfigured they could become if they kept fighting. But Vanessa meant what she had said before. She did not want to be taken alive. Vanessa contorted wildly and struck him, reigniting the fiery pain in his chest. Of course, that movement caused her to bleed even more, but she didn't seem to care. Vanessa began fighting back with a renewed ferocity, ramming into him, not seeming to care that her struggles were just making the hooks dig deeper. She pushed and shoved, every blow harder than the last, backing him towards the unprotected ledge. Blood began to pool on the floor. He loosened his grip a little, not wanting to hurt her even more, but that only gave her hope that there was a way out of this. Moon tried to dig his heels in to stop her from forcing him back, but he slipped across the dark puddle, staggering several feet closer and closer to the edge. Oh, no, she was actually going to throw him off the stairs this time. Everything blurred together in a burst of movement that he couldn't quite keep track of. He lost his sense of direction in his desperation to scramble away from the drop, twisting and slashing and kicking in a mess of metallic limbs. And then an unseen jab to his vulnerable side finally forced him to let go. The moment she got a chance, Vanessa braced a foot against his chest and kicked him away from her. His catchers, now slick with her blood, slid off of her as he was forced backwards. Moon fell, but he didn't go over the edge. Instead, he fell down harmlessly on the metal platform, his back against the closed door, dizziness still swooning through him as he looked up to see what had happened to her. In the struggle, Vanessa seemed to have lost track of where the 100-foot drop actually was. She had also fallen from the force of the kick, but in the opposite direction than she'd hoped. Vanessa's legs were already over the side, her red claws screeching against the metallic rails as gravity eagerly prepared to plunge her all the way down into the hellish scrap dump below. The damage he had inflicted on her was shown to him in gruesome detail. Hunks of white bone peeked out from the deep lacerations across her nasal cavity, a piece of her scalp flapping against her ear like a half-peeled orange, her right cheek split open to reveal a row of molars beneath. It was an image that would linger with him for the rest of his life. "Help!" she pleaded. "Moon, help!" Fanny's eyes locked with his as she slipped backwards further and further. A terrified little girl was looking at him, crying for him. Overpowering emotion took control at the sight. Moon forgot everything else and dove for her, his good arm reflexively grabbing onto the metal floor to keep himself from falling too, his stomach hitting the edge just as she dropped. His left hand snagged around her outstretched wrist, catching her. Fanny's weight swung down from him in an excruciating heave, nearly ripping his arm from its socket. He managed to hold her up for just a few more seconds. Moon's other hand stayed rooted into the platform's ridged floor, unable to switch and hold on to something else in fear that he would be dragged over the edge with her. His head snapped back towards her just in time for Vanny to meet his gaze. Even with her shredded face, her emotions were clear to him. She was afraid, then confused, then desperate. The stairs seemed to tip where they were hanging, the floor leaning, trying to make him slide off face first into the cavernous darkness. Agony tore up through his arms, several springs and wires already pulling loose, not built to support this much weight. He held on anyway with all of his might, yelling, don't let go, please!" They were almost safe. Almost. But the arm he was trying to save her with was the left one. His bad arm. Vanny was still holding on, still crying a mixture of tears and blood, still trying to climb back up to safety with him. But something popped in Moon's shoulder, stretching and creaking and bending, breaking. Their eyes met again as the last few wires failed him. They spent just a moment of dreadful understanding together, both of them knowing that no matter how hard they tried, there was nothing either of them could do to stop what was about to happen. Moon's bad arm finally snapped off. The sight of her mangled face left, taking the disconnected limb with her. Vanny fell. But she didn't shriek or yell or curse at all. She was eerily quiet, plummeting through the chilling air, his little girl being taken away from him further and further and further. Moon forced his eyes shut just as he heard the ghastly impact. When he opened them again, Moon could only scream in horror at what was left of her. Woo! She's dead! Yay! Moon is not going to be very happy about it, but Vanessa's dead! Yay! Every other character celebrates. Okay, so just in case some people clicked on the chapter 26 link before getting the explanation as to why I have a new channel, here is the explanation again. Here we go. So, the explanation as to why this is happening and why I have a second channel now is because of monetization issues. For a really long time, my parents have been pushing to try and get my videos monetized because of how hard I work on them and how many people seem to enjoy them. But for years, I've been unable to do that because of a simple glitch where YouTube thinks that I'm way younger than I actually am. We went back and forth with the people who are supposed to be in charge of this, but they never responded. So the only option is to move everyone onto the second monetized channel instead so I can actually get paid for what I do. I'm moving on to adulthood right now, and since this rewrite takes a whole lot of time out of my day, I need to have a source of income to justify continuing this project. Basically, if it becomes financially worth it for me to spend time on this rewrite, I'll be able to keep on working on it instead of quitting YouTube because the rewrite is taking too much out of my day and I can't make ends meet. So, I'm sorry about this, but I'm gonna have to ask you guys to like the video and subscribe. I really do need that if I want to keep this project going, so please subscribe to the new channel, like the video, comment your favorite part, and hopefully I'll be able to continue. So, yep, that's about it. Thanks for your time. Bye!